In this video, we're going to show how FortiAnalyzer, or FAS for short, can be used to alert users about login attack events in a monitored environment. We can monitor for these events, of course, based on logs from Fortinet devices, such as FortiAnalyzer, FortiManager, FortiGate, FortiAuthenticator, and a whole suite of Fortinet products. But we can also monitor for these events from the normalized fabric logs, where we can look for a wide range of relevant activity in logs from systems like Linux, Windows, even Cisco or Juniper routers, and many other log types. For this particular use case, we'll show a couple of examples. The first will include triggering an event based on authentication logs from FortiAuthenticator, specifically ZTNA logs. Then, we'll show an event using more advanced logic that monitors for attempts to brute force an administrator login on a FortiGate. Now, in this environment, we have a few different device types reporting to FortiAnalyzer. For this particular demo, we will be interested in these two FortiGates named FortiGate 4 and FortiGate 5, as well as logs from the FortiAuthenticator. Now, if I'm worried about login attacks in this environment, I could just manually search through the logs for login-related events, starting in LogView. For example, I know that when a FortiGate sees a failed admin login attempt, like through the GUI, that activity gets logged under Fortinet Logs, FortiGate, Event, and System. Now, if I filter for message contains administrator, I'll see we've had a bunch of failed authentications over the last 4 hours or so. Now, it would be much more efficient to just let FortiAnalyzer's event handlers identify the interesting logs and events for me. Event handlers are FortiAnalyzer's rules for generating alerts and events based on the content and details of the logs received. FAS includes hundreds of predefined event handlers that you can use to generate events. You can also create custom event handlers from scratch or by cloning a predefined event handler and then customizing it to meet your needs exactly. Now let's start by looking at what sort of login attack related event handlers are predefined in FortiAnalyzer. Under Incidents and Events, I'll go to Event Handlers, and at the bottom right, I can see that I have about 269 currently defined event handlers, many of which that have 4 or more different rules included within the handler. So we're talking about over 1,000 different rules that are all predefined already. For now, I'll filter for login, and we see a variety of different events and rules that match the string. The relevant event handlers we're going to see in action today, shortly, will be the custom ZTNA brute force login and custom ZTNA login anomaly detection handlers, as well as the one named custom brute force account login attack FGT. These are cloned versions of the default handlers where there have been minimal changes, but we could modify them as required to meet our needs. Starting with the custom ZTNA brute force login, we can see that there are 4 rules that are defined as part of this handler. Now, this is what's called a basic event handler, so the rules have an OR relationship between each other. So an event is generated when the conditions of any one of these rules is met. Digging into one of these rules, say brute force login attack, I can see that this rule is going to search through the normalized fabric logs from the SIMDB. Specifically, it's going to look at FortiAuthenticator logs. You can see data source type equal to FortiAuthenticator. This handler will look for logs from failed authentication attempts. As it sees these logs, the system will group them by user ID, shown here under log field. If it sees 10 failed attempts from the same user, defined here under the event conditions as a group contains 10 or more log occurrences, if it sees at least 10 of these failed attempts, all within a 10-minute window, then the rule is matched and the FAS will trigger a custom ZTNA brute force login event. Similarly, the rule authentication failed from multiple geolocations also looks at normalized fabric logs from FortiAuthenticator, with all of the log filters being nearly the same. But the event conditions look for when logs with the same user ID fail to authenticate when coming from 3 different source geographic countries, all within a 5-minute window. In that case, this particular rule will fire an event. In addition to monitoring authentication failures, ideally, we should be watching for patterns in successful authentications as well. We can use the custom ZTNA login anomaly detection handler for some of these. For example, the successful authentication from multiple geolocations is once again looking at FortiAuthenticator logs can see FortiAuthenticator under data source type and fabric normalized, but this time it's looking at successful ones. Here, when the same user ID authenticates successfully from 3 different geographic countries in just 10 minutes, an event will be raised. Theoretically, it should be nearly physically impossible to travel that quickly between 3 separate distinct countries in that short of a time. So the event also gets a searchable tag, which you can see under advanced settings, of impossible travel. In just a minute, we'll see what these events look like when detected. Now, for more advanced logic, we have what's called a correlation handler defined, here named custom brute force account login attack FGT. With correlation handlers, as opposed to the basic handlers we've already seen, we have more options for advanced logic. Instead of being limited to only an or relationship between the different rules, correlation rules can use logical operators such as and not, followed by, and not followed by, as well as being able to be grouped and nested. In this handler, we're monitoring for when a login fails 5 times in a row and is not followed within 5 minutes by a successful login. Now, we'll click here to see more details on exactly what kind of login failure. Okay, a FortiGate, so an admin login on a FortiGate. So this would be started when an admin enters their GUI credentials incorrectly 5 times in a row on their FortiGate over a 15-minute window. The 15 minutes we see defined here under threshold duration. After the 5th attempt, if the admin doesn't successfully log in within the next 5 minutes, this event will fire. The idea here being that it's looking to catch brute force credential attempts in the earliest stages, but not triggering when an administrator makes an honest mistake and quickly corrects themselves. In the case of this handler, we can also see that notifications are enabled with a profile named email alerts. We'll cover that in a minute. Now, I'm going to trigger this brute force FortiGate event, which requires 5 consecutive failed authentication attempts. To make it a little more interesting, I'm going to fail at the GUI 3 times, and then on the console 4 or 5 more times. This also lets us avoid the 60-second cooldown timer in the GUI after failing to authenticate multiple times in a row. Now that's done, it'll take about another 5 minutes to trigger this event while it waits for a successful login. So while we wait, let's look at the email notification setting in more detail. First, I defined a mail server to send emails to under the System Settings Advanced Mail Server tab. Here I've created one called FortiMail Evoke. Under Incidents and Events, I go to Event Handlers and then Notification Profiles. Here, I can create 1 or more notification profiles that I can use to send event notifications over email, Teams, SNMP, even to ServiceNow, or send a notification out over a generic webhook connector. In our case, we configured the profile email alerts. This will send an email notification to our test1 mailbox on FortiMail, and the message subject will start with the string security alert from Baz. But first, we'll start here in the GUI under Event Monitor, where we can see any events that have been triggered by enabled handlers. I've created a custom view already where I've filtered events for the handler name containing the string custom-ZTNA. I've named this ZTNA login events. And here we can already see examples of the type of impossible travel scenarios that we talked about before. Here I can look at events where a single user tried to authenticate and failed over the course of a single minute, but from 3 different countries. Similarly, I can see brute force login attack events and see the details of the logs as they've been defined. Now, for our correlation event from the failed FortiGate admin authentication attempts, if we go over to FortiMail, we can see that we do have a new unread email. Opening the email, I can now see details about the event that was detected and triggered by FortiAnalyzer, with several of the fields being shown here being configurable in the event handler settings. Now we can also view this event in the FAS GUI as well. Here we see custom brute force login attack FGT. Now, if I want to take this event and track it as a potential incident, possibly for investigation, I can select the event, right-click, and choose Create New Incident, which will create a new incident in the Incidents tab for investigation. Now, incidents can be tracked in the Incidents tab. And we see our new incident right here that we just created. So those were a few examples of how FortiAnalyzer can be used to detect and alert on different kinds of login attack events. Thank you for your time.